The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Do kids have enough opportunities to be independent? We'll discuss that tonight. Then journalist Carol Off joins us to discuss her new book, At a Loss for Words, Conversation in an Age of Rage. That's ahead on The Agenda. Imagine sending your 3-year-old child to the store for groceries, or your 5-year-old to grab takeout. While most parents wouldn't dream of it, TVO's new series, Old Enough, sets out to explore what happens when we let kids out into the world alone for the first time. Joining us now to discuss just how resilient kids are these days, we welcome Alex Russell, psychologist and co-author of Drop the Worry Ball, How to Parent in the Age of Entitlement. Emil Niazi, writer of the parenting column The Hard Part at The Cut. Nikki Martin, chair of early childhood studies at the University of Guelph-Humber, and two parents whose son Simon participated in Old Enough. They are David Clemmer and Stéphane Aubin. And hello, nervous parents.
Hello.
You're still around. You're doing okay.
We're doing okay.
We welcome the parents. We welcome the experts. And it's great to have this discussion here about this program that I don't know about all of you, but I was a bit terrified just watching it, let alone going through it. Mm-hmm. So, Stéphane, shall we start here with how terrified you were to allow participation by your young kid in this to begin with?
Oh, I think it was a mix of being terrified because I knew the city could potentially swallow him up, but also being very excited because I come from a relationship where we often have this discussion of, offering more independence and wanting to pull back. We really are the yin and yang of allowing kids to explore life on their own. So I was very excited for this challenge.
You were excited. You were
A
petrified.
nervous wreck.
Yes, you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Simon had just turned 5, sending me into a market that's so busy. My anxiety goes off. So to send him there, and of course with the crew, but I don't know the crew, and I just assume that they're going to be everyday real people, so he is not on to it.
Just explain, David, how it worked, because his task was what?
So his sister was having a birthday, so we wanted to do a birthday, and he loves to entertain. So we had to get some ingredients for Frankie's birthday.
So you sent him to the St. Lawrence Market in downtown Toronto.
Yes.
To buy
2 red snappers.
fish.
Yes.
Yeah.
2 baguettes. A ledge of cheese or wedge of cheese for a charcuterie board.
Yeah.
And grapes, both red and green.
And Stéphane, technically he's not on his own, right? He's got a film crew disguised following his every move.
Well, it's a mix of feeling like a horrible parent because you're sending your kid into a very busy place on their own, but knowing that there are 8, 9 camera crew disguised, and a lot of the vendors are aware that this child will be coming in, so they're on the lookout. But the key is to really let him find out where he's going on his own. Mm-hmm. And you sit there as a parent, nervous, going through every scenario, catastrophizing, and then hoping he's actually going to say please. Is he going to be polite?
Yes.
David, when you told him, here's what we would like you to do, was there any hesitation by him about doing this without his parents?
Oddly, no. Like to my kind of demise, I was hoping that he'd be like, no, I have to go with you. So of course work called, so I had to take the work call. And I'm like, Simon, can you at least start with this grocery list that we need? I'll meet you, or if you finish the tasks, come back out and hopefully Daddy will be finished the call.
And he was gone before David could finish
He
the
was like
sentence.
skipping by. I'm like, Simon, do you know? Yes, I know. Just leave me alone.
He was fine with the whole thing. You were not.
Totally, I was not. And then I was pacing, and then I was like, okay, this is an hour and a half. He's in the market. What is he doing? And PAs would come out the odd time and be like waving, and I'm like, no, don't just wave to me. How's he doing? Like, is he saying please and thank you? Does he need to use the washroom? And these parent things.
I just have to explain a dynamic. When we would have gone to the St. Lawrence Market as a family, it was not an enjoyable experience because David was constantly saying, where's Simon? Where's Frankie? Where's Simon? So this exact scenario without us there, seeing that unfold on TV was magical.
The show is called Old Enough. Shall we have a look at how he did?
Oh,
Sheldon,
absolutely.
if you would, let's roll the clip.
I was just dropping
let's have a look. Are you so tired?
Only the blood I have to run in back to the store to get. I got the fish, I got the cheese,
Okay.
and I got the grapes. Both colors.
Okay, so you're gonna go back in?
Yeah, they get the.
What kind of bread?
bread?
What kind of bread?
The long bread.
Yeah, how many?
3.
We only need 2, but 3 is good.
No, Clovis.
Come on, buddy.
You are so scared. It's so funny.
No,
Okay.
it isn't legit.
Alex,
Paranoia. Oof.
what can kids learn from this kind of experience?
You know, what kids learn from this is that they can do it. And so when parents believe that their child can do it, the child learns that he can do it. But conversely, when you don't give him this opportunity, your expectation is that he can't do it. And that's what he internalizes. The way you see your child is how he sees himself. And so you don't want him to see him as being capable of something he can't do.
Right.
To go down to do this all by himself without all that support wouldn't be good for a 4-year-old. But to know that he can and to believe that he can changes his sense of himself. He sees himself as competent.
Nikki, there are several episodes obviously in this series, and in some of the other episodes, there are 3-year-olds being sent by themselves to go run errands, go to the dry cleaner, get the hem of Dad's pants fixed. I mean, some of the details, and a 1-inch hem, and the kid got it all right.
Yeah,
like the kid nailed it. But what do you think about the idea of a 3-year-old being sent out on errands to begin with?
I think that those 3-year-olds, I think you have to know who your child is. And I think that's a really important part. Not all 3-year-olds or even 5-year-olds will be able to do that. And I think that it's about giving challenges inside. So what I thought was really great about the show is in those 3-year-old episodes, they actually showed the children organizing the house, doing little chores. So the parents knew that the child was capable of taking on a little bit of risk or responsibility. So they weren't out in the wild on their own. And I think it's important to think about adversity, how your child manages with stress, and because we don't want to develop resilience, we don't want to give so much that they crumble. We want to give enough that they know that they can be successful. And I think the important part that we saw in all of the episodes is love. And I mean love as the science of love, as what it truly is, of having the child feel seen and heard and valued, know that they have a safe space to land, and know that they are trusted. When you know that you're trusted and you can come back and you can make mistakes and you can fail and take risks, you can do amazing things. And I think that's what we were able to see in the show that I was really impressed with, regardless of age. 3, I would be uncomfortable with.
Emile, how do you react to what you saw?
I think it's great. I have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 7 months. And one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, just like you two, is how can I help them gain independence, gain confidence while living in a city where there are risks, there are real dangers. Car is my biggest fear. And give them the sense that they can accomplish things that are a little bit scary and a little bit hard. And it's so heartwarming and so wonderful and so funny. And I love that his instinct was to get 3 baguettes, because that is what a good host does. Of course. And it really makes me want to give my kids a lot more independence myself.
Alex, could a parent who watched these episodes be forgiven for thinking, this is nuts? There's no way a 3-year-old should be crossing busy lanes of traffic, even with a crossing guard, even with camera crews watching, on his own.
They'd be right to think it's nuts without all of that support, because you wouldn't want to just send your 3-year-old out to the dry cleaner without that support. That would be not wise, especially with a busy street. But actually, yeah, with all that support, I think lots of parents might look at that and say that's crazy. And that's part of our culture right now. We are too often underestimating children's emotional competencies. They're capable of a lot more than we're aware of. We've become helicopter parents, and part of that is underestimating what kids can actually take on. And as we're just saying, when we underestimate them, they come down to that level. What we need to do is work in what they call the proximal zone of development, to see that what's just becoming capable, they're just becoming capable of, and we operate in that zone. And so that sometimes they try and fail, but it won't be catastrophic. It might be a bit painful, but we believe in them. And when we believe them in that way, up they come each time. And we're a generation of parents who tend to do the opposite.
Yeah. Let me go back to the parents here. What do you think your son gained from this experience?
Oh my gosh, the echoes of that day we hear every single day. He has developed a sense of self and confidence from that one experience, which is kind of shocking. But he refers to that day of shopping so many times throughout his interactions with other people at school. Something as simple as our older daughter, it took her a long time to be able to walk ahead of us to go to school. Well, Simon right now, because he had that experience, he is able to go right with her, hand in hand, and he feels that we are there for him, but he is strong enough to do it on his own.
David, do you worry there is a part of him that is, because he nailed that,
Right.
overconfident, and he may not recognize dangers when he should?
Well, of course, I'm not parent, and of course I will think that. But it was really refreshing for me to actually view the episode because I wasn't in the market with him. And he is a good little independent kid that I had not seen. He was not afraid to ask for help. He was corresponding with adults, and a lot of children I find are quite shy and intimidated by these taller people. But he's not, and I'm a lot less worried. But I think he also is a smart enough kid to know his own boundaries, he's only going to test himself a little bit at a time as well. I do feel he's that kid. He's got a good head on his shoulder. And Frankie as well, even maybe just a bit more reserved. But I think they're going to tread the waters knowing that they can at least do these things now. And they can do them without us, which...
I think we also discovered that as parents, sometimes out of fear or for some reason, we shelter them from strangers' reactions to them in that moment. And watching the episode and seeing how lovely people were with this little child gave him, I'm sure, the ability to think that he can go up to anyone. You know, we say don't talk to strangers, but I personally have never met a mean stranger in my life. You know, there's a lot more friendly strangers out there. So it's encouraging the proper interaction, and just seeing him do that in the market was amazing.
David, there's a lovely moment in the show where one of the vendors is giving, I forget what it was, something, grapes or whatever, to your son. And she says, now you go take this home to your mom and dad. And he says, very matter-of-factly,
Right.
without hesitation, oh no, I've got two dads.
Yeah.
When you saw that moment on
It's
tape,
a pretty
what'd you
proud
think?
moment, I have to say. And you know, we've always been 100% honest with the kids as soon as they were old enough to kind of understand how did this work. We've been very upfront, and they're very proud of that too. You know, Father's Day in our house is a big deal. Mother's Day, well, we still go out for dinner and celebrate. There's some grandmas and a lot of aunts that they do get that holiday as well. But yeah, it's a pretty amazing experience. Almost as much for me as it was for Simon.
Yeah.
Emil, I wonder how parenting, I mean, you watch parenting, obviously, that's your thing. How's it changed from the time you were a kid to now that you're a parent?
Well, I think we are, far more aware of how we can screw up our kids. I think there's just a glut of information out there, and that information often changes. You know, you can read a book now, and then 6 months from now, 11 think pieces about how that book was completely wrong, and you've already adapted your parenting style to, you know, evolve, and then it evolves again. And I think we are very conscious about making sure we don't, you know, mess up our children. And I think that means we parent with a lot of anxiety, with a lot of fear. We want to really protect the kids rather than let them grow and evolve and understand how the world works. You know, I was thinking as we were talking how much by sort of protecting them, I'm not letting them figure out like what is dangerous and why it's dangerous, right? If I just say, you know, don't cross the street, they don't understand why if I don't allow them to actually engage with the world and pay attention to their surroundings. That's like our new thing at home.
And take on some of the anxiety.
Yes, exactly.
So he's learning to be anxious on his behalf.
Right.
So-
When
because
we
he
do the
knows what's
worrying
dangerous.
for them, they don't learn how to be adaptively anxious.
Yes, exactly. And I think when I was a kid, it was all about sort of like benign neglect, you know, they're there. It's very loving, but, you know, that's why we had latchkey kids. And that's why we had, you know, I had a house key and basically sort of like figured it out for myself. I can't imagine like letting my kids just walk home after school alone, make their own food, and then I'll be home when I'm home. But was it so bad? I mean, here we all are alive. And I think, yeah, we're just very, very conscious. And I think we parent under surveillance too, whether it's on social media. I was thinking about how the vendors sort of had to be aware, because I think these days there's just as much fear that someone will see your kid out on the street alone and then call someone, and now you are in big trouble. And I think, you know, whether it's true or not, I think we perform parenting just as much as we engage in the act of parenting as millennials and Gen Zs and parents of younger kids
Let me
today.
follow up with Nikki on that. Do you notice a significant difference in the way that, say, boomers versus millennials versus Gen Z, Gen Z, however you pronounce it, how they all parent?
Well, yeah, because life changes, right? Like life is different now. Before the internet, we had this experience of our worlds were really small and there were our communities. And so I remember walking down the street and being like, there's homes with stickers on them that I can go into and they're safe when I'm walking home. So if I feel unsafe, I can ask for help. And
They were block parents,
They were block
right?
parents.
Yeah.
That's what
Block
it was called.
parents.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now that we don't have that, we don't have those safe spaces. But that was one of the things I loved about watching Simon as well, was that he was confident to ask for help when he needed it. And I think that comes from an internal feeling of people are there. When we're infants and in our first 5 years, what we learn is, one of the things we learn is internal working models, is how the world works, how relationships work, how can we feel confident with people. So if I have at home experiences that I can ask for help, I can fail, I can take risks, and it's safe and I'm cared for, then I can also ask you for it, and I won't crumble inside of me because I have a strength inside of myself. I don't need somebody outside of me to take care of me. And I think that's what we're aiming for. With the internet and now social media and everything evolving over time, the world has gotten smaller, so we have this sense of everything's really scary. And my child's going to be abducted. And I'll be honest, it'll be really hard. Like, can you live with yourself if you take a risk and your child is abducted? I could never live with myself. Like, that risk feels too great for me, but it's also not real. And that's the interesting part, is that in our communities, we can see, and one of the beautiful things I loved about your episode was you could see that people were there to help. Here's a little guy walking through going, hey, where's the bread? And they're like, oh, just down there. Like, it's amazing. And I think that was a nice reminder for me of people are there to help and support. And I agree. I've never met an unhappy stranger. I've met somebody that didn't help. So I think that maybe it's an opportunity for us to rethink.
Your son did this, but your daughter is older.
Yes.
Could she have done it, or would you have wanted her to do it?
I think when it says, when they say you have to get to know the child, there is a very stark difference between Frankie and Simon in terms of their confidence level to engage with the world.
Frankie's how old?
Frankie is 8 years old.
That's your daughter, and Simon is?
Simon is 5.
5.
Yeah, he had just turned 5 at the time. Yeah. A little more apprehension there. And I feel like with Simon, had there been an experience that may have not gone well during the St. Lawrence Market extravaganza, he would have worked through that, and it would have been very easily let go. Perhaps with our older daughter, who just has a bit more anxiety, I would have been more hesitant because that might have been a little more traumatic, whereas I wouldn't want a fear to develop of being on your own, I'm trying to encourage her to be on her own in the world, and Simon is quite open to the idea. Perhaps because he has an older sister to always give him that support, But yeah, it's a different child.
I don't think Frankie would have left my side.
No.
In all honesty, especially with that list, or she would have, purchased one thing and then quickly ran back to make sure that I'm still coming to join her. There's no question. She's definitely that. She's reserved. She's a lot more calculated. She's a thinker. So she'd be like, I know what's going on here.
Can I ask you though, David, are you're a very short leash parent, or you were anyway? You're a much more.
Yes.
Are you a longer leash parent now that you've seen what's possible?
Absolutely, I have to say.
You have changed.
And I have changed, and it took just looking in at this episode to be like, my kid's okay. He's going to be fine. And those are some nice strangers that he met.
Alex, same family, 2 different kids, 2 different experiences, 2 different levels of capabilities according to the parents.
Yeah.
How do parents decide what's age appropriate and when?
Well, I'm so glad you're paying attention to who your kids are. I mean, it's true that age and stage, there's some general truths that at 18 months, you should have baby gates at the top of the stairs for all kids, right? So there's certain there's certain benchmarks that are a bit more universal, if you like, but every child is so different, and you can hear that Frankie and Simon are very different individuals, especially when it comes to anxiety. And so, Simon's a bit more robust. And I loved your question. Are you worried now that he's like, look, Ma, no hands? and you're realizing, no, actually what happens is when kids go through this, they learn how to be, I said it earlier, adaptively anxious. It sounds like Frankie has a little bit more predisposition towards some anxiety. So he's a little bit more close to home. Yeah. And so this wouldn't have been a particularly fun exercise for her at all.
You've got 3 kids. Now, the youngest is less than a year, so perhaps this question doesn't make sense for that kid yet, but have you had discussions in your household about the relative levels of resilience you see in the 2 other kids and what they can handle, what they can't handle?
Absolutely. I mean, I see it on in small ways, like ordering at a restaurant, and we started letting them sort of choose and be the one that orders. But to Alex's point, we went traveling this summer, and our oldest son is usually the very shy, anxious, reserved one. And, up until now, we've kind of parented to that. So, very, very protective, very conscious of not having his feelings hurt or giving him too much. And we noticed over the summer, he just evolved because we did give him a longer leash. And he's just in 2 months, he's so much more confident. And then now we're parenting to that. And I think our default is our daughter is very vivacious and independent. And, kindergarten drop-off, she just started in September. She was like, see you later, couldn't care less. Whereas my son cried for, I think, an entire year.
You dropped the daughter off and you cried.
Exactly. She was just like, flicked her hair and left. But yes, knowing the kids, but seeing how much my son was able to change with a little bit of independence and confidence, it's made me think, how much more can I give them? Right. And how much more space can I give myself as a parent to meet them where they are at, as opposed to where I think that they're at.
Nikki, there's an expression, 95% of what we worry about never happens. But boy, oh boy, that 5% really terrifies us.
Really does.
How do we learn to parent without being consumed by the 5%?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. And I struggle with this. I've struggled with this a lot myself. Not everybody comes from the same experience in life, right? We don't all have happy experiences in childhood where we have to, and then we become parents. And I think every parent wants is to make their experience of their child better than they had, right? You want to have happy, healthy children, and sometimes it's really hard to know how to get there. So it's about learning, because if you haven't experienced, it's really hard to do something you've never experienced before, right? If you've never experienced that feeling. So it's about trying, parents need to try themselves. How do I take a little bit of risk internally? How do I let go a little bit? And what happens? And I would say a watch, wait, and wonder approach, right? You make a change, watch and wait to see what happens. What does the child's reaction? And then you can give a little bit more, and you can develop this confidence within ourselves. I think sometimes we look at the child, and this is a great conversation, we think about temperament and all of these things of who the child is, but we forget about ourselves, and what parents bring to the table really makes the difference. And so being able for ourselves to grapple with our own experiences and our thoughts about, why am I doing this? What is safe? Is this mine? Is this my fear? Or is this real fear in the world? And being able to play with that internally and allow a little bit here and a little bit there, so you feel comfortable and don't overwhelm the child with like a sudden, like throw out into the woods, but allow that slow progression for both of you. It will grow beautifully, and a great relationship will form. And what I really think is important, and what all the research says, is really, if a child feels safe, if they feel like they are trusted and are safe in the world, then they will have an idea that their world is safe, and they will be able to have great success in life.
Let me pick up on that, because parents could be excused by watching the local news every night to think that we live in a world of complete mayhem where there are carjackings every minute of the day. There are stabbings, there are murders, there are, children being picked off the street, whatever. There is undoubtedly an emotional reaction to seeing all of that on the news. Let me ask our director, Sheldon Osman, to bring this chart up, because here are the facts. Crime rates in Canada, measured per 100,000 population, we're going to go back to 1962. This is all StatsCan data. Property crime and other crime, quote unquote, peaked in the early 90s. You see, and I guess for the people who are listening on podcasts, I'll just describe. We've got 4 lines on a graph here, and we're going across from left to right. And crime levels are fairly low in 1962. They come up and they start peaking in the 1990s. Terrible recession in the early 1990s may have had something to do with it. But then since then, the lines on the graph start going down. And even violent crime has grown relatively little since the 1960s. Now, those are empirically provable facts, but they may not deal with the underlying emotions that people feel when they watch the news. So, Emil, start us off here. If the facts suggest that we are actually not living in a Mad Max country, how do we parent accordingly?
Turn off your social media. Don't spend hours watching really scary TikToks that suggest that, if you go to Walmart, your kids will get kidnapped in the parking lot, because that's not the reality. Pay attention to what's actually happening around you and in front of you. That's what I do. We live in essentially downtown Toronto. I feel so safe. My kids feel so safe. But what I ask of them is just to pay attention to their surroundings. And I think, that's what I try and do. I try and assess what's actually going on. But when I do get lost in social media, my anxiety and my fear ratchets up. It's noticeable in myself. You have the stats to back up that it is actually much safer. But it's hard not to parent to what you feel is happening around you. But really, I just pay attention to what's actually in front of me, and that is that we live in a very safe world. This is a very safe city.
Right.
And I don't want my kids to feel they're in an unsafe world. I want them to understand what is really unsafe for them. And like I said, it's cars for the most part, So why teach them to fear an imaginary threat, kidnappings, stabbings, when the real threat is often vehicles or, not paying attention to where you're walking. And so I just really try and make them understand what's right in front of them. My kids are afraid that coyotes are going to crawl up and open the window and come inside their bedroom. You know what I mean? Like, kids are not afraid of what we think they're afraid of. It's not the boogeyman. So I think we should teach them what is actually right in front of them and what is going to make a difference in their world.
Alex, I'll follow up with you. I mean, the crime stats are what they are, considering we're currently sitting in a city, depending on what boundaries you want to look at, the GTA, 6 million people. It's relatively little crime for a city of that size, but it's not nothing.
Right.
How do you convince parents not to be overwhelmed in parenting styles depending on crime?
Another thing to think about, we're talking a lot about anxiety, aren't we? And I'm not surprised we are. We were talking about how anxious you are, and we're talking, and so the thing about anxiety is it's not a very reliable emotion. Anxiety is a combination of fear, which is an animal part of our brain, and anticipation and imagination. Anxiety is a hybrid, a tricky emotion. And as a result, it does all kinds of goofy things. For example, our anxiety systems mistake awfulness for likelihood. A couple times we've heard people mentioning child abduction because it's awful. It's astronomically remote that it would happen. But because we're so scared about it, we drive our kids everywhere, and that's actually when we kill them in car accidents. So, our anxiety systems is a really important emotion for us, but it's a tricky one. So another thing that parents really want to do is be aware of your emotions. Be aware of when you're in the grip of anxiety, because it's a little bit of madness. Just a little bit. You can hear this coyote's going to climb in our windows. That's the childhood version of it. And as adults, we're worried. It distorts our ability to really assess the situation. So all parents, all modern parents, where there's so much weight on our shoulders as parents, we feel so obligated to our kids now. It's not all bad, but we do. We're inundated with anxiety. And if you're not aware of your anxiety, you'll act out on it. If you can name it, you can tame it.
Hey, that's a good one.
Yeah,
If you can name
I didn't
it, you
make
can
that up. But if you don't name it, you still might act out on it. But at least you have a fighting chance. to be aware that you're in the grip of this emotion.
Parents, do not misunderstand this question as sounding judgy, because it's not meant to be judgy. But we were in the green room before we started the program. Your son was on a device. He's 5 years old. Do you think about what social media you're going to allow him to consume and at what point?
It's a conversation that we speak
Daily.
every single day. It feels like that devil and that angel that are always on our shoulders trying to advise us how to do it. And the answer, there's no clear answer. For example, today's device, that was an agreement that I made with Simon this morning a long time ago, and he was looking forward to being able to be on that device while I was in here, and he's holding me accountable for that. But yeah, we speak about that, and I almost have more anxiety as a parent when it comes to that aspect of raising your children than I do about letting my kid walk to school or go to the store on their own. I find that the internet has a much more daunting way of controlling us, and it can do a lot more damage. And I speak from a personal experience of me getting anxiety from being on the internet, and then how can I expect my kids to be able to navigate this world when it's almost so new to me that I find myself getting wrapped up in it, and their brain is this big. How can they develop into a human being if they're scared of that world and the real world?
David, he's on the device. I hope he was not on X or 4chan or something like that.
No, I don't think
He's
he
watching reruns of DOJ.
Smart kid. There we go.
Smart kid.
What do you allow him to see on the device? What is still not permitted?
It's all very much a compromise, and I guess like anything, you know, here are a few chores that you need to do. Make sure you know, get dressed in the morning. Make sure you brush your teeth. Make sure you make your bed, whatever that looks like. It's the attempt anyway. And then you have like a half an hour. It has to be limited. And we always give a 15-minute warning and then a 5-minute warning just to kind of almost woo them off, because and obviously this is affecting them in this way by cutting it just off. It doesn't matter if it's been an hour. If we said half an hour only, they're very anxious and they're very upset with us. Why didn't you give me the warning? Why didn't you prepare me for this? They're almost so addicted to it, is what is really concerning to me. But I know that on the other side of the coin, they're also learning a lot of things that I'm like, how do you know that stuff?
And it's such a part of the world and their life now.
Yeah.
You know, the minute that we say, okay, we're taking a whole break from devices this week, it turns out that we need to be on the devices for school. So where do we draw that line as parents between, you know, you're talking to your grandmother on FaceTime, or we're checking in with my sister who lives in Alberta, or we have to do, you know, math on there. And the YouTube you're watching about natural disasters, you're actually learning things because you're teaching me. It's very confusing as a parent.
Not in the classroom, as we now know.
Yes.
No
not
devices in the classroom.
Right, great.
This was great. Thank you, everybody, for doing this. I want to say Old Enough, which is the program we've been talking about, it's available for streaming on YouTube and on the TVOkids.com website. The show's a scream. It's absolutely a scream. We've all watched it here. It's just fantastic. And, of course, if you just like watching television, as we used to call it, you can catch it on Sunday and Tuesday evenings on TVO, on the television set.
Old school.
Old school, that's right. Experts over here, two dads over here. Thanks so much for joining us here on TVO tonight. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Language can feel like a battlefield, with words meaning different things to different people. Words such as woke, freedom, and even taxes have fraught definitions depending on whom you ask. Carol Off, perhaps best known for hosting CBC Radio's As It Happens for 16 years, writes about all this in her new book. It's called At a Loss for Words, Conversation in an Age of Rage. And Carol joins us now for more. It's so good to have you in this studio.
I'm so glad to be in this studio.
You know, we did the math just before starting here, and this show started in September 2006, same time you started As It Happens.
That's right. We talked about it at the time of where we were going, what trajectories we were both on. And, well, we've spoken since then, but that was the first time, I think the only time we talked about our careers. And here we are.
Still alive.
Still alive, still kicking.
Okay, 6 words that you chose to write about. Freedom, democracy, truth, woke, choice, and taxes. And to that end, here comes the excerpt. I have chosen to concentrate on a list of keywords that I believe have been hijacked, weaponized, or semantically bleached vocabulary that's on the endangered species list when it comes to civil society and liberal democracy. Hijacked, weaponized, and bleached. To what end?
Well, it depends on who is doing it and to what end. What I conclude in the book, we're going to jump to the end, is that there are vested interests who would like to see us angry with each other, those who rage farm, I call them the agents of chaos, those who have a vested interest in having society and government not function because they see a benefit for themselves in that. So that's how I get to what I get to in the end. Who's behind this, what interests there are in breaking us down as a society. But a whole bunch of other things happen. There are many other players who contribute to the adversarial nature now of our lives, our political lives, and how we don't talk to each other. We yell at each other. We're angry with each other. And so what I wanted to get to was that we don't have to live that way. That why don't we reclaim the words and reclaim the conversation?
It felt to me, if I may be permitted this observation, that you shared more of your opprobrium for the extreme right as opposed to the extreme left, who also do it. Is that a fair observation?
Fair observation. The reason why is because the script could have been flipped as well. But at this point, where the money and the power lies in politics in the United States especially, but increasingly in Canada, is with the right and with the hard right. And that was the rhetoric that was having the most effect on the society that we live in. That was where the rage farming was coming from. What I found was that in this shrinking political space that the left now finds itself in, especially the hard left, is that they are drawing the wagons into a circle. They are refusing the conversation as well. They have an ideological position where there's no point in talking to them. If you talk to them, you just give them a platform. So I could see that that was a factor, but it didn't have the power and the influence, the money, the political strength on our hard right, especially in the United States, was so much more dominant than it was on the left.
But I guess we should be clear about the consequences you see here, which is that the majority of people who tend to be in the sort of moderate pragmatic middle, they're getting squeezed out on both sides. Is that fair to say?
And I call them the frustrated middle. They're people who want to live in a civil society, who want to solve our problems, want to talk to each other, whether they agree with each other or not, want to find a way to start solving our problems collectively. Because we face enormous problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's wars, and also the possibility of more pandemics. We need to agree with each other. We need to agree to disagree. So we need to reclaim vocabulary that we share, that we agree upon the meanings of, and that we find is clear and unambiguous. And so, and there are those vested interests who do not want to see us do that, who, when you listen to someone like Steve Bannon, who former aide to Donald Trump, who makes it really clear there's no conversation to be had. They are the enemies, and we are going to eradicate the enemies. And if you take him as the most extreme example, along with Donald Trump himself, you see that this is where people who said, no, there's not going to be a conversation. We're not talking. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to get rid of the woke menace that these people represent. And we know woke menace is just a code phrase. But they cannot have the world they want to live in unless they deny any oxygen to those who don't share their views.
Let's do a clip here. I suspect you've interviewed Anand Giridharadas over the years. He was, well, let's just play this clip here talking about how the left can be equally as exclusionary. Sheldon, if you would, let's roll it.
I think in many ways the progressive left sometimes has a problem of being formally committed to an agenda that is, the most inclusive agenda in human history if you look at it on paper, but gives off a vibe of being a hard-to-access movement. If you don't know the right terms, if you don't understand the pronouns thing, if you were kind of socialized as a man 40 years ago, you're not a predator, but you're just socialized in a different time.
We're going to shame you.
You can't quite get in. And the far right in the United States is the opposite. It is formally committed to one of the most exclusionary programs in modern American history. But if you look at something like the Trump rally, the vibe is come as you are, no judgment, get in here.
Fair point?
Well, there are a lot of points that were made there. I agree with Anand on many things. I read a lot of what he had to say as I was writing this book. And one of the things he's also said, he didn't say it there, but that he said that the left is, when it comes to the word woke, he said that there are many people who are in the process of waking up. They may not be sufficiently woke. They may not be completely woke, but they are awakening. And that there isn't enough patience with those who are trying to figure out how the world is changing, trying to come on board to a rapidly evolving society, whether it's with gender identity, whether it's with medicine, whether it's science, whether all the different challenges people face, whether it's with immigration and with the changing racial complexion of our country. People are trying to maybe come to terms with it, not everybody. And so that there is a tendency in the hard ideological left to not be tolerant of that. You either are completely, you're just wrong. You don't understand. We won't tolerate your view.
You're deplorable, according to one former
Well, there was one
nominee for president.
So it ends up being a silo. But it's, again, I think what happens is that people are pushed into those silos. I think they've drawn the wagons into a circle because they are against what Anand is describing there, which is this extremely powerful right. And they're not inclusive. We're now seeing, it's quite interesting how the script has flipped with Kamala Harris. And you're now seeing the Kamala Harris world talking about freedom to be who you are.
Let me pick up on that.
Okay, right.
Okay, because, yeah, well, let's go through some of the words here. And freedom is a great place to start, because when you and I were coming up in journalism, conservatives owned the word freedom. And if you watch the Democratic National Committee presidential convention, whenever it was, 2 weeks ago, last week, whenever it was, holy cow, that word freedom was all over that convention, and that was a Democratic convention. How did that happen?
It's so surprising for me because my first word in the book is freedom. And when I was writing it over 2 years, that I thought, the very dark years when I thought we had lost this language, when the word freedom had come to mean the freedom from obligation to others, the freedom to do whatever you want, the freedom to have no government in your lives. And then suddenly, not only did the Democrats and Kamala Harris walk on stage day one and start talking freedom, and Beyonce singing freedom and owning that word and saying the freedom from what? The freedom from losing your health care if you change your job, which happens in the United States. The freedom to love who you want to love, to marry who you want to be with. The freedom to live in a healthy world. The freedom from need, which was the old FDR line. The freedom from need, because you can't be free if you feel that you can't even got a roof over your head or you can't feed your children. So this whole concept of freedom, which was originally a left idea, is taken back by the Democrats. And then you see the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, it's a specific group, who are talking about, we're going to take these books out of libraries, we're going to take away we're going to get rid of the woke agenda, we're going to fire people from universities.
We're going to tell which women can't have abortions.
We're going to tell what you can do with your body. We're going to tell you that you can't, when you can have children. We're going to tell you how, J.D. Vance, we're going to tell you how young you should be to have children. So suddenly you have the script completely flipped, and you have these MAGA Republicans who are anti-freedom, and you have the Democrats talking about not just to be free, but to have a different kind of freedom, and also owning the MAGA freedom when Tim Walz said, it's none of your damn business. I'll live my life the way I want to live it.
It's funny how he said that at that convention in 2024. Pierre Trudeau said it in 1968, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, Pierre Trudeau said that the state does not belong.
Has no business in the bedrooms of the nation.
But it had no problems being in the wombs of the nation, as I write in this book.
He did have an abortion law at that time, didn't he?
And he upheld it, a 100-year-old abortion law that denied women a legal right to get an abortion.
Although, I hasten to add, the Justice Minister of the day, John Turner, did allow for circumstances under which abortion was legal.
Well, yes, except it was, very narrow circumstances. It already existed. And John Turner also being a Roman Catholic, because it was a very strong Roman Catholic view, and Otto Lang was also another minister, and then all the ministers in Quebec who were against it too. And it took Henry Morgenthaler, as I write about in this book, and took him 18 years.
And he went to jail.
And he was in prison in Bordeaux, and to get women the right to have reproductive freedom. And we got it for the right reasons, because in Canada, the justices, the Supreme Court justices in Canada said that a woman has the right to choose how her body is being used. In the United States, they didn't get that right, and that's why they lost it, I think, with the Roe v. Wade.
I was going to get to this later, but since we're here right now, and I'm trying to remember now, the story of the conversation you had with a granddaughter about when she would have children?
Yeah.
Tell us about that story, because that was, I can see you right now just getting
getting
tingly about it.
Yeah, well, what happened is that it was just weeks after Roe v. Wade had been struck down in the United States, and even though it wasn't our country, I think all women felt this, had the sharp intake of breath. Like, when does it happen here? And of course, The Handmaid's Tale was kind of this echo through the times that we now live in, with Margaret Atwood's story of women completely losing their freedoms. And so it was on my mind, and I was playing in the playground with my granddaughters, and my one granddaughter, who at that time she was 10, and she said, "Grandma, is it true that there's medicine you can take to not have a baby?" Where she heard this, I don't know.
At 10, she knew this.
At 10, she'd heard this, and I said, yeah, there is. There is medicine that you can take to not have a baby. I didn't tell her all the details. She was too young. And she just thought about that for a second. She says, "I'm going to have 2 children. And for me," and then my other granddaughter listened, she says, "I'm going to adopt." And it struck me, I was so emotional about that, because I had grown up. I came of age in the 60s and 70s, still at a time when we didn't have choices. Choices didn't exist. And so they started to emerge. We started to see women having these rights and freedoms that we now take for granted. But I was seeing the possibility that that could devolve. And so these little girls thought they would have the choice of when and even if to have children. This is so fundamental to a woman's rights. And so they just presumed that that would happen in their lifetime. And I had this moment of sort of panic when I thought, what if they don't? What if they lose everything we have fought for these decades?
At some point, you'll take them aside and tell them who Gloria Steinem was, etc.
I will. They'll also find out a lot of other things I didn't want to tell them at that point.
Let's go for the word woke here. Progressives use it to insist that society become more awakened to the pain of many who have experienced it through generations and so on. Conservatives spit out the word as if to say, you're forcing us to meet some kind of ideological purity test that none of us can meet, and we're failing. What do you think it means?
What the word woke means?
Yeah.
Woke originally meant just being aware. And it was Leadbelly and others in the last century who brought this idea to the fore, this idea that black people in the United States should be aware of what's around them. And then during Black Lives Matter, it evolved into a more political and even ideological view, which was that we have to be aware that there is systemic racism. We have to understand that they are that the racism and the not just because it evolved eventually woke to represent not just black people and people of color, but also LGBTQ communities, and that these minorities were under siege, and so the prejudices, the bigotry against them was deeply into the system, and that had to be dealt with. It had to be understood how deep these views were. And so that's what the word woke came to actually mean for them.
Does it mean a bad word today?
I think, well, the Black Lives Matter they've abandoned it. They don't own it anymore, because it's been taken over by this idea of wokeism, and that wokeism is I think, a language vector. I think it's a word to accuse someone of being woke or a woke radical or one of having a woke agenda is a way to smuggle odious ideas into the public space under the guise of being, I'm not against this black community. I'm not racist. I'm not saying anything bigoted. I'm just against wokeism. But wokeism represents, first of all, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the three key things that we are still holding on to in this country, but which they are eradicating in many parts of the United States. And these are key things, they needed reform. There's no question that what they call DEI needed some work. But this was the idea that somehow these woke-minded people were trying to impose their agenda on us, which meant that we're trying to create a space of pluralism, create a space that's inclusive, create a space where people can realize who they are within the society. And so you can't be against that. You can't say, I'm against people having their rights. I'm against people being equal. I can say I'm against wokeism. So it's a way of actually exercising a racist view without actually declaring yourself racist.
We got a few minutes left here, and I want to try, let's see if I can get a couple more of these in here. You and I are both old enough to remember a time when, I'll just call it for what it is, when Jew hatred was a phenomenon on the far right. And it seems today that there's far more Jew hatred on the left. Just like the word freedom has kind of migrated. What happened here?
Do you think that's the case?
Well, I think there's plenty.
Tell me what's in your mind when you say that to me.
Well, I think I'm looking at the same thing everybody else is. I think I'm looking at, for example, a head of CUPE Ontario, Fred Hahn, who's had to apologize twice for anti-Semitic tweets. He's the leader of a public sector union. I see a lot of evidence that there are far more people on the left today who seem to have a problem with Jews than people, and Israel, than people on the right. It looks that way to me. Am I wrong?
No, I think there's absolutely a hard ideological left that is anti-Semitic and can be racist. It can be. I think that anti-Semitism. No one has a monopoly over anti-Semitism. It is so pervasive. It is probably one of the most pervasive forms of bigotry and racism. That's why it should have its own name. We talk about all kinds of like racist behavior, but anti-Semitism is its own specific category, and it turns up like a bad disease. All over the place. I think there is absolutely a hardcore element in the left that is subscribing to those views. And I feel, and it makes me angry because I think that a lot of people who are pro-Israel and want to see two states in the Middle East are overwhelmed by statements being made from more radical and more extreme elements that have in many ways co-opted the movement. And I'd like to see them just on both sides, the ideologues who are saying extreme things, let's shut them out of the conversation. Let's find a way. That's the whole point of this book about conversation, is that we get for the rage farmers and the agents of chaos to say, you don't want to have a conversation with us. Us in the middle, we want to talk about resolving things.
Is it impossible to win them over?
No, I don't think it's possible. I just think we should just cut them out. They don't want to have a conversation. So people, and we know that this is where I think ambiguity is so important, is that people who are totally sympathetic with what's happening to the Palestinians can also be totally sympathetic to the Jews and to Israel. And most of us are of two minds. They share those two views. We can have two views at the same time. We don't have to be
for both
either.
peoples.
Absolutely. Justice and understanding. You don't have to be, you don't have to listen to Hamas to care about the Palestinians. You don't have to listen to the warmongers in Netanyahu's cabinet to be totally sympathetic to Israel. And so I think that's where I think most of us are in the middle, and yet the loudness, the volume of the voices on those sides amplified by social media and by the rage farmers and the agents of chaos who want those amplified because they want to see divisions. They want wedges to be driven between us. They want adversarial conditions are ideal for demagogues and for autocrats and wannabes. And so it's in their interest for us to not be of two minds, to see and listen to each other and to have conversations where we listen deeply.
Well, in which case, let's finish up on this, because I wanted to get to the end of this book and think, oh, here's the path forward, and we're all going to be able to have these reasonable conversations again, and civility will reign supreme. And then I see you quoting the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Pullos, who says, we're toast. So maybe optimism is misplaced here? What do you think?
I was so anticipating this question while I was writing the book, and I thought, oh, I'm going to be talking to Steve Paikin, and he's going to be thinking, she's such a Pollyanna if she thinks it's possible for us to have conversations when everything is falling apart. But I think in the past month, 2 months, I've started to feel this, what they call the politics of joy, politics of hope, that it's possible that we can move back into this area where and of course Kamala Harris introduced that idea. I don't know if she will be the president or if she'd be a good president, but at least she's bringing this idea back to us that we can care for each other again. And so what in the last chapter is taxes, and taxes is because unless we have redistribution of wealth, unless we are able to see ourselves as being citizen equals voter equals taxpayer, that those three things are together, and we do that in the interest of civil society, and we have to pay for that. And so I think it is possible. I think we can find this place where we start caring for each other again. And that was Steve, and what Polo's said to me, we're toast, was he said that the separation of the classes in Canada, which is growing at the fastest rate in Canada it's grown at in decades. No one can remember when the separation between rich and poor, just between middle class and upper class, is growing at this rapid rate. In the United States, the 90% of the people have less than the trillionaires at the top. I mean, trillions of dollars have moved their way to the 1% in the U.S. And that's a trend that has had such an effect on the United States. And I think Canadians are looking, thinking, do we want to go there? To say, get rid of taxes, axe the tax, reduce taxes. Well, yeah, but what are we going to lose in our ability to care for each other and to have a society that is aware of others' needs and can free some people from want? I don't think Canadians want to go in that direction.
These and other compelling thoughts, as they say,
Thank you.
are in At a Loss for Words conversation in an age of rage. Karoline, so great to have you here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. Just how useful is a post-secondary education these days? We'll assess that on tomorrow's program. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.